My name is Clara Monroe, and for most of my 42 years, I've lived my life like a well-tended but overshadowed plant, always angling for a sliver of sunlight. I work as a senior archivist at the Port Blossom City Library, a quiet life spent in the gentle company of history, where stories are neatly filed and the past has the decency to stay put. My home is a small cottage in Willow Creek, a neighborhood where the fog rolls in from the bay each morning, clinging to the mossy oaks and lending the world a soft, muted quality that has always suited my disposition. I have a son, Sam. He is my sun, my moon, and all my stars. He is the single, unwavering bright spot in a life that has often felt like a series of compromises. He inherited my quiet nature, but not my hesitance. Where I bend, he stands firm, not with aggression, but with a kind of rooted certainty that I've always envied. This story, which is really our story, begins not with a bang, but with the fragrant, earthy scent of freshly ground coffee. It was a week before Christmas, and the air in my kitchen was warm with the promise of cinnamon and baking to come. Sam walked in, his cheeks flushed a rosy pink from the sharp December wind, holding a small, brown paper bag with the reverence of a holy relic. "I got it," he announced, his voice filled with a pure, uncomplicated pride that made my heart ache. He placed the bag on the old oak table between us. "The last one. Had to go all the way to the market on the north side. It's the winter solstice blend Grandpa Robert loves." He beamed at me, and in that smile, I saw the culmination of his effort. It wasn't just a pound of expensive coffee beans. It was a pilgrimage. It was a gesture of love, carefully researched and executed for a man who, I was beginning to realize, measured love in a currency my son did not possess. Sam still operated under the beautiful, heartbreaking assumption that thoughtfulness was the coin of the realm in our family. That effort would always be seen and appreciated. I had just gotten off the phone. My hands were resting flat on the cool granite of the countertop, and I suspect they were the only things keeping me upright. I hadn't moved since I'd hung up. I just stood there, a statue of a woman listening to her son's happy chatter float across the room. A gentle melody played over the discordant roar in my own head. Something inside me had fractured during that phone call. It wasn't a loud, shattering break, but a quiet, seismic shift, the kind that reroutes rivers and changes landscapes forever. A feeling I had suppressed for decades had finally surfaced, not as hot rage, but as a chilling, crystalline clarity. It was my mother, Helen, who had called. She always began difficult conversations with a syrupy, affected warmth, a verbal pat on the head before delivering the blow. "Clara, darling, how is everything?" she'd chirped, her voice a little too bright. "Christmas is just around the corner. We're going to have a full house this year, just bursting at the seams." I murmured something non-committal, listening to the familiar cadence of her preamble. Then came the gentle, surgical strike. "Darling, with so many people coming, we were thinking, perhaps it might be better if if he sits this one out. Just for this year," she added, the words quick and slick. "You're still welcome, of course. We'd love to have you. It's nothing personal, you understand. It's just a matter of space." But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it was profoundly personal. And then, as if on cue, the supporting chorus began. My father's voice, sharp and imperious, cut through the background. Robert, a retired history professor who valued intellectual pedigrees above all else, wasn't even attempting subtlety. "For heaven's sake, Helen, just tell her. We don't reward mediocrity in this family." My mother shushed him, a soft, fluttering sound. "Robert, please. That's not a kind way to put it." The whisper was the most damning part. It wasn't that she disagreed with the sentiment, she just disapproved of the blunt delivery. He ignored her. "That school of his, what is it, Riverbend University? It's a glorified community college. It's an embarrassment." Then my nephew, Ethan, chimed in, his voice dripping with the casual cruelty of the perpetually entitled. "Aunt Clara, is it true they hand out stethoscopes made of macaroni at graduation? That's what I heard." He laughed, a short, barking sound. I wish I could say I responded with a sharp retort, that I defended my son with the ferocity of a lioness. But I didn't. The years of conditioning, of swallowing my own feelings for the sake of a fragile piece, were too deeply ingrained. I simply pressed the red icon on my phone screen, ending the call, and stood there, feeling as though my own operating system had just been wiped clean. The cruelty was staggering, but it was the ease of it that hollowed me out. It was a well-worn joke, a comfortable family narrative they had clearly been passing around behind our backs for months. And the most gut-wrenching part of it all was Sam, still in the living room, unaware. He was carefully wrapping a small, beautifully illustrated book on native coastal birds, a gift he'd chosen for my mother, who had once, years ago, mentioned a fleeting interest in birdwatching. He'd remembered. He'd always been the one who remembered. "Mom," he called out, his voice light. "I think Grandma Helen will really like this. The illustrations are by that artist from the coast she likes." I managed a nod. I might have blinked. The memory is a blur of pain. What do you say to a child who still believes that love is earned through simple, honest goodness? That showing up with your whole heart is enough? That night, unable to sleep, I did what so many of us do when the world feels like it's tilting off its axis. I scrolled through my phone, a mindless search for distraction. And that's when I saw it. It was a temporary post on Ethan's social media feed, the golden grandchild, the one enrolled at the prestigious Atherton College of Business, a place with a name that rolled off my parents' tongues like a prayer. The post was a short, slick video. It showed a pristine, leather-bound Atherton textbook next to a crumpled, dog-eared paperback with a crudely drawn logo for Riverbend U on the cover. The caption read, "Choose your fighter. One gets you a seat at the table, the other gets you a seat at the kids' table. If you're lucky." There were comments from his circle of friends, a Greek chorus of privileged condescension. "LOL, Riverbend is where dreams go to die. My barista went to Riverbend. He makes a decent latte, I'll give him that. Is that even a real university?" And then I saw it. The little red heart icon next to the post. It had been liked by one person whose approval felt like a knife in my chest, Robert Monroe. My father. He hadn't just seen it, he had endorsed it. He had co-signed the humiliation of his own grandson. I felt something fundamental inside me give way. It wasn't a snap, it was a slow, grinding release, like a ship slipping its moorings and drifting silently out into a dark, unknown sea. My son was asleep in his room, probably dreaming of anatomy charts and patient care, his heart full of a future he was building with integrity and hard work. He was probably planning to write a Christmas card to his grandparents, thanking them for their love and support. And I, his mother, had to find a way to tell him that the very people he sought to honor were laughing at him. That he had been deemed unworthy of a seat at their table, not because of a lack of space, but because of a lack of a brand name on his future degree. They had called him a failure, and yet they still expected me to show up with a smile and a casserole, to participate in the charade of a happy, loving family. A storm was gathering behind my ribs, a quiet but powerful tempest. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. But the next day I began to act. And soon, they would be the ones calling me, their voices laced not with condescension, but with pure, unadulterated panic. To understand the tectonic shift that occurred that Christmas, you must first understand the bedrock of my family. We were a family built on the worship of prestige. It wasn't education we valued, but the letterhead on which it was printed. My parents, Robert and Helen, were both academics who had spent their lives in the hallowed, dusty halls of a well-regarded university. They weren't wealthy in the traditional sense, but they wore their doctorates like hereditary titles and expected their children to secure their own noble pedigrees. My older brother, David, was born 3 years before me, and from birth, he was anointed as the heir apparent. He was, in their words, profoundly gifted, a designation that required an astonishing amount of external support. Tutors, test prep courses, summer leadership camps, private coaching, no expense was spared in the construction of David's success. He was the family's grand project, the primary investment. When he was accepted into a top-tier law school, my parents had the acceptance letter professionally framed. It hung in their study for years, a testament to a victory they felt was as much theirs as his. They paid for his tuition, his apartment, his books, his everything. Then it was my turn. "We'd love to help, darling," my mother had said, her smile tinged with a delicate, practiced regret. But after putting David through school, things are just a little tight. The family coffers, it seemed, had been mysteriously depleted just as I reached the finish line. Yet, the expectation remained the same. I was to attend a top-tier university. I would simply have to finance it myself. "Student loans are perfectly normal," my father had stated, as if delivering a lecture. "A sound investment in your future." So I did it. I took the loans. I studied diligently. I earned the degree from the right school. And I graduated with a beautiful, embossed diploma and a mountain of debt that felt like a physical weight on my shoulders. There was no framed letter for me, no celebratory dinner. There was only the quiet, unrelenting arrival of the monthly statements. Now, in my early 40s, with a respectable career and a life I have painstakingly built, I am still tethered to that debt. It is the ghost at every feast, the silent subtraction from every paycheck. It dictates my choices, curtails my dreams, and serves as a constant, humming reminder of the price of my parents' approval. When they retired, they came to me with worried faces. Their pensions, they explained, weren't quite enough. The cost of living had risen. "You know how it is for academics," my father said with a sigh, as if their profession exempted them from the practicalities of financial planning. And, because I was still playing the part of the good daughter, still chasing a validation that never came, I believed them. I started sending them money each month. At first, it was a few $100s to help with groceries or a utility bill. Over the years, it became a regular, expected stipend of $800. To afford it, I made cuts in my own life. I patched the roof instead of replacing it, drove my car years after I should have, and told myself that a vacation was an indulgence I couldn't afford. It was, I thought, what a dutiful daughter does. It never once occurred to me to question where the money was truly going. When it came to raising Sam, I was determined to break the cycle. I never sold him the lie that his worth was tied to the name on a diploma. I told him that a meaningful life was one built on passion and purpose, not prestige. I wanted him to choose a path that would bring him peace, not a lifetime of financial servitude. He listened. More than that, he watched. He saw the way I tensed up when bills arrived, the quiet anxiety that shadowed my face when I reviewed my bank account. He was a deeply observant child, and he understood my struggle in a way he never articulated. So, when his own college acceptance letters began to arrive, he made a quiet, deliberate choice. He was accepted to a highly prestigious university, the kind of school that would have sent my parents into raptures. He never even told them. He didn't want their input, their pressure, their ownership of his success. Instead, he chose Riverbend University's School of Medicine. It wasn't an Ivy League, not a name that would impress my father's academic cronies. But it was a solid, respected institution with an excellent program in primary care, which was his passion. He had received a generous scholarship, and by living at home, he would be able to graduate with zero debt. I was immensely proud, not just of the acceptance, but of the profound wisdom of his choice. He had chosen a life of service over a life of status. He had chosen freedom. To my parents, however, this choice was not wisdom, it was a betrayal. They couldn't see the logic, couldn't appreciate the maturity. All they could see was a missed opportunity for reflected glory. It was an embarrassment they couldn't abide. This double standard was thrown into sharp relief by their adoration of my nephew, Ethan. Just a year older than Sam, Ethan was following in his father David's footsteps, all style and no substance. He was enrolled at the absurdly expensive Atherton College of Business, a place that seemed to major in entitlement. My brother and his wife funded his entire life, from his designer wardrobe to his downtown apartment. Ethan was arrogant, smug, and possessed a lazy condescension that set my teeth on edge. But to my parents, he was the golden grandchild. They littered their social media with his accomplishments, writing long, glowing captions about our future captain of industry. They spoke of him with a proprietary pride that was as suffocating as it was exclusionary. My son, Sam, was a footnote, an afterthought, mentioned only when I brought him up first. Every year, my parents hosted a grand Christmas dinner. It was a cherished tradition, a gathering of family and a tight-knit circle of their oldest friends, fellow academics and their spouses who had become our extended family. These people were not just my parents' guests, they were our people. I had grown up calling them Aunt Susan and Uncle Tom. They had watched Sam grow from a shy toddler into a thoughtful young man. They'd attended his school concerts, sent him birthday cards, and asked him about his life with genuine interest. He felt known in that room. He felt he belonged. So when my mother called to say there was no room for him, it wasn't a logistical issue. It was an excommunication. And when I heard my father's cruel pronouncement in the background, it felt like the final, definitive betrayal. For years, I had believed that if I were just patient enough, good enough, accommodating enough, my parents might one day see me, and by extension, my son, for who we truly were. I used to think my greatest mistake was taking on all that debt. But I was wrong. My greatest mistake was believing, after all these years, that they were capable of change. Sleep did not come that night. I lay in the darkness, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The anger I'd expected to feel had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. For my entire adult life, I had been walking a tightrope, carefully balancing my own needs against my family's expectations. But they hadn't just moved the tightrope, they had cut it. Down the hall, I could hear the soft rustle of pages as Sam studied. It was his first winter break from medical school, and he was reviewing neuroanatomy with the same focus he applied to everything. I stood in the doorway of his room, unseen, and watched him for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. The question hammered in my mind, how do I tell him? How do you tell your child that his own grandparents find him wanting? That the love he gives so freely has been rejected, not because of any fault of his own, but because he failed to choose a path that would sufficiently stroke their egos? I walked into the room and sat on the edge of his bed. Sam, I began, my voice softer than I intended. We need to talk. About Christmas. He looked up, his pen hovering over a diagram of the human brain. He blinked, his gaze clear and direct. I told him everything. I recounted the phone call, the saccharine preamble, the casual cruelty of the dismissal. I told him what his grandfather had said, what his cousin had added. I even told him about the social media post, the public, casual mockery. I laid the ugly truth out between us, piece by piece. He listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. His gaze never left my face. When I finished, the silence in the room was vast and heavy. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He didn't cry. He simply closed his textbook, placed his pen neatly beside it, stood up, and walked out of the room. A moment later, I heard the soft click of his bedroom door closing. It was a sound of absolute finality, a full stop at the end of a very long and painful sentence. There was no, "It's okay, Mom." No, "I don't care what they think." Just a profound, wounded silence. And that silence hurt more than any argument ever could. I sat there for a long time, the ache in my chest a physical presence. Then, a new feeling began to surface, pushing through the grief. It was resolve. Cold, clear, and unyielding. I went in my laptop and opened my email. A few weeks prior, my mother had sent her annual Christmas dinner group email. The subject line was a cheerful Christmas at the Monroes. Christmas tree, she had copied the usual list of guests. I scanned the names. 18 of them. There was Susan and Tom, who had known me since I was a teenager. There was the Garrisons, our old neighbors. There was Dr. Coleman, my father's former colleague, a gentle man who always asked Sam about his science projects. These were not just my parents' friends. They were my community. They were Sam's community. So I began to make calls. My voice was steady, my message simple and direct. "Hi, Susan, it's Clara." "Clara. Darling, I was just thinking of you. Are you bringing that amazing pecan pie this year?" "Actually, Susan, that's why I'm calling. Sam and I won't be able to make it to my parents this year." A pause. "Oh? Is everything all right?" "They've decided to uninvite Sam," I said, keeping my tone factual, devoid of self-pity. They said it was a matter of space, but I thought you should know the truth. The silence on the other end of the line was thick with disbelief. They, what? I don't understand. They don't approve of the medical school he chose, I said softly. They feel it's not prestigious enough. I heard her draw in a sharp breath. Robert said that? He did. And more. That's monstrous, she whispered. That sweet boy. Another pause, and then, her voice firm, well, if Sam isn't welcome, then I don't think Tom and I feel very welcome either. Thank you for telling me, Clara. One by one, I made the calls. The reactions varied: shock, quiet anger, stammered apologies on my parents' behalf. But each conversation ended with the same unspoken understanding. A line had been drawn, and they were being asked to choose which side they were on. By Christmas Eve, my phone was buzzing with texts. From the Garrisons, "We're so sorry to hear what happened, Clara. We'll be dropping off a gift for Sam tomorrow, if that's okay. We won't be going to your parents." From Dr. Coleman, "Robert has lost his senses. Please give Sam my very best. I am proud of him." Even my sister-in-law, Laura, David's wife, sent a private message. "Clara, I had no idea they said those things. It's horrible. Ethan is out of line and I will be speaking to him. I'd like to come to your place on Christmas Day, if that's all right. Just don't tell David yet. I'll handle him." I didn't invite my brother or his son. This wasn't about revenge, I told myself. It was about creating a sanctuary. It was about surrounding my son with the people who truly saw him, who valued his character over his credentials. Christmas morning, I woke before dawn. The house was still and dark. I moved through the kitchen with a focused, quiet energy. I brined the turkey, peeled the potatoes, and rolled out the dough for the pie crust. Every chop of the knife, every stir of the spoon, felt like an act of reclamation. I was not just preparing a meal. I was building a new tradition on the rubble of the old one. Sam emerged a few hours later, his face still shadowed with a quiet sorrow. He offered to help, but I just smiled and squeezed his shoulder. "I've got this," I said. "Just relax." He seemed to understand that this flurry of activity was something I needed, a way to channel the storm inside me into something warm and nourishing. By 5 o'clock, my little cottage was aglow. Fairy lights twinkled around the windows, the table was laden with food, and the air was thick with the scent of roasted rosemary and melting butter. And then, they started to arrive. Not as a trickle, but as a steady, warm stream. 13 of the 18 invited guests from my parents' original list came to my home instead. They came bearing bottles of wine, boxes of chocolates, and hugs that felt like a shield. They didn't just greet Sam, they celebrated him. Susan told him about her nephew who went to Riverbend and was now a beloved small-town doctor. Tom reminded him of the time he'd fixed their computer when he was only 12. They talked to him about his classes, his hopes, his future. They wrapped him in a cocoon of genuine affection and respect. And slowly, painstakingly, I watched the light begin to return to my son's eyes. Then, my phone rang, the screen glowing with my mother's name. Of course! I stepped out onto the small, cold porch, the festive sounds of my home muffled behind the closed door. I took a deep, steadying breath of the frigid air and answered. "What did you do?" Her voice was not the silky, manipulative tone I knew so well. It was sharp, brittle with rage. "What in God's name did you say to everyone?" "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice calm. "Don't you, hello, Mother, me Clara. We cooked a meal for 20 people. My table is empty. Robert and I are sitting here with David. That's it. 3 people. Sounds like you'll have plenty of leftovers," I said, the words falling like ice chips into the silence. "This is not a joke. Did you tell them? Did you tell them we asked Sam not to come?" "You didn't ask him," I corrected her gently. "You uninvited him." "And yes, I told them." I told them the truth. "That was a private family matter," she hissed. "It stopped being private when you broadcasted your disappointment to anyone who would listen. It stopped being a family matter when you decided my son wasn't good enough for your family." I could hear her sputtering on the other end, searching for words. "You said he wasn't welcome, Mother. You just didn't think there would be consequences." I ended the call and stood for a moment in the cold, still air. Inside, someone had put on music. I could hear laughter, the clink of glasses. I saw Sam through the window, sitting on the sofa, deep in conversation with Laura. He was smiling. A real smile. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a profound sense of peace. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't thrown a tantrum. I had simply refused to absorb their poison. I had built a new table and it was full. After the last guest had departed and the final plate was washed and dried, a new kind of quiet settled over the house. It wasn't the strained silence of the past week, but a peaceful, settled quiet. The kind that comes after a storm has passed, leaving the air clean and fresh. I found Sam in the living room, staring into the twinkling lights of the Christmas tree. He had been reserved for much of the night, a participant but also an observer. The wound was still there, I knew. It wasn't bleeding anymore, but it was still tender, still raw. He looked up as I entered. "Thank you, Mom," he said, his voice soft. "For all of this." "You have nothing to thank me for, sweetheart," I said, sitting beside him. "This is what family is supposed to feel like." He nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I know your parents," he began, hesitant. "I don't want to be the reason." "You are not the reason for any of this," I interrupted, my voice firm but gentle. "You were just the catalyst. This has been building for years. I just refused to see it." I reached for my phone, a decision that had been solidifying all day, finally clicking into place. I opened my banking app, navigated to the scheduled payments, and found the recurring transfer of $800 to Robert and Helen Monroe. I used to think of that money as my filial duty, a bandage I was applying to their financial struggles. Now I saw it for what it was, a subsidy for their prejudice. My sacrifice was enabling their judgment. My hard-earned money was funding the very lifestyle that gave them the platform to look down on my son. Without a moment's hesitation, I hit cancel. A small pop-up asked me to confirm. I pressed it. Done. No dramatic farewell, no angry text message. Just a quiet, digital severance. A boundary, finally drawn not in sand, but in stone. 3 days later, my mother made her next move. She posted in the extended family's group chat, the one that included distant cousins and great-aunts, a place for performative family harmony. It was a photo of her near-empty Christmas table, artfully cropped to emphasize the vacant chairs. The caption read, "A very quiet Christmas this year." So sad when some people forget the meaning of family and seek to cause division. It was a masterful stroke of passive aggression, designed to paint her as the victim and me as the vindictive daughter. I watched the comments roll in. "Oh no, what happened?" From a cousin in Oregon. "Sending you love." From my father's sister. I let it sit for an hour. I made myself a cup of tea. Then, with a steady hand, I responded. I didn't argue or explain. I simply posted 2 things. First, a screenshot of Ethan's post mocking Riverbend University, complete with the caption and, most importantly, the little red heart next to my father's name. Second, a single, unadorned sentence of my own. I was on the phone when my father said, in the background, "We don't reward mediocrity in this family," and my son was uninvited from Christmas dinner. Then I added one final line. "We chose to spend Christmas with people who believe kindness is more important than prestige." We had a full house. I put my phone away. I didn't need to watch the fallout. The facts spoke for themselves. Later that evening, a few private messages trickled in from other family members. "Thank you for your honesty, Clara. We had no idea." No one defended my parents. There was only a deafening silence from their side. Almost 2 weeks passed. Then, on a cold Wednesday afternoon, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find my parents standing on my doorstep, bundled in their winter coats. They looked smaller, somehow, without the backdrop of their grand home. "We thought it was time we talked," my mother began, her voice strained with forced civility. I didn't invite them in. I simply stood in the doorway. "Talk about what?" "Clara, let's not be dramatic," she said, her smile as thin as ice. "We need to clear the air." "Clear the air." I repeated, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "The air is perfectly clear. You made your feelings about my son perfectly clear." My father, who had been silent until then, shifted his weight. "You're tearing this family apart over a misunderstanding." Was it a misunderstanding when you liked Ethan's post mocking Sam's school? Was it a misunderstanding when you called his choice an embarrassment? There is nothing to misunderstand, Dad. You were cruel. And you were not subtle about it. We have always supported you, he blustered, his face turning a blotchy red. You paid for nothing, I cut in, my voice dangerously quiet. I paid for my own prestigious education, and I am still paying for it. And I have been paying your bills for the last 5 years. My mother flinched. We never meant for it to be taken this way. Then you should have thought about that before you dismissed my son's future, I said. Before you hurt him. There is nothing more to say. I stepped back and gently closed the door. I didn't slam it. It was a simple, quiet act of finality. I leaned against it, expecting to feel a tremor of guilt or sadness, but there was only a profound, liberating stillness. 3 days later, there was another knock. It was Ethan. He stood on my porch looking deeply uncomfortable, his expensive coat doing little to hide his unease. Hey, Aunt Clara, he mumbled, avoiding my eyes. Can we talk for a second? I crossed my arms. What about, Ethan? He shuffled his feet. Look, I feel like this whole thing got blown way out of proportion. The post was just a dumb joke. I didn't mean for it to cause all this drama. A joke? I asked, my voice level. You publicly humiliated your cousin. Your grandfather endorsed it. And now you're here because you feel bad. He hesitated, and in that small moment of hesitation, the truth spilled out, unintentional and ugly. Well, yeah, Anne. Grandma and Grandpa said. They said that with you. You know, cutting them off. They can't really help me out with my expenses right now. The pieces clicked into place with an audible snap in my mind. The blood drained from my face, replaced by a slow, creeping heat. Help you out? I said slowly. The money. The $800 a month I've been sending them. You're telling me that money was going to you? He had the grace to look ashamed. He didn't deny it. He couldn't. My retirement support, my patched roof, my foregone vacations, they had been funding his designer clothes and downtown apartment. They were using my sacrifice to underwrite the lifestyle of the very person they used to belittle my son. It was a betrayal so layered, so profound, it almost defied comprehension. Behind me, I heard Sam moving in the kitchen. I didn't want him to hear this. I didn't want to tarnish him with this final, sordid detail. I turned my full attention back to my nephew. Leave, I said. The word was quiet, but it carried the weight of every sacrifice, every swallowed insult, every quiet hurt. Get off my porch. And don't ever come back. He opened his mouth, a half-formed apology on his lips, but I closed the door before he could utter a single word. This time, I turned the lock. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of freedom. It has been 2 years since that Christmas. There has been no contact. No calls, no letters, no awkward encounters at the grocery store. The silence from their side of the family is absolute. My brother, David, chose his side, or rather, he simply remained where he had always been, in the comfortable shadow of our parents' approval. My son, Sam, is thriving. He is in his 3rd year of medical school, and the light that was so nearly extinguished that winter now burns brighter than ever. He is excelling in his clinical rotations, praised by his supervisors for his compassion and his calm, steady presence. He is going to be a magnificent doctor. More than that, he is a good man, unburdened by debt, free to follow his calling wherever it leads him. A few months ago, I heard through my sister-in-law, Laura, with whom I maintain a quiet, tentative friendship, that Ethan had dropped out of Atherton. There was some kind of disciplinary issue, a story involving academic dishonesty and a profound disrespect for his professors. He is now, apparently, taking classes at a local community college, trying to salvage an academic career that was built on a foundation of sand. The irony is not lost on me, but I feel no triumph in it. Only a quiet sadness for a boy who was taught to value the wrong things. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, as I sit in my cozy living room surrounded by books and the gentle quiet of my own making, I think about that Christmas. I wonder if I was too harsh, if rerouting an entire holiday dinner was an act of petty revenge. But then I look at my son, I see the peace in his eyes and the confidence in his stride, and I know the answer. It wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. It was about teaching him and myself that we get to choose who sits at our table. We get to decide what family means. And sometimes, the most loving thing a person can do is to close a door, not to keep others out, but to protect the precious, sacred space within. It was not the end of a family, it was the beginning of ours.